and welcome to the Society of Construction Law Australia's podcast, the podcast where we will look at technical and legal issues facing the Australian construction industry. My name is Melissa Yeo, and I am one of the directors of the Society. In this episode, we hear from Dr. Ashley Brinson, Executive Director at the Warren Centre. Ashley presented at our national conference in Canberra in November this year. Ashley tells us about the opportunities available in the construction industry and the role the Warren Centre is playing in leading research around these opportunities. I hope you find Ashley's presentation as informative as I did. Be sure to subscribe to the Society of Construction Law podcast to be alerted when new episodes are available. We look forward to sharing more updates from our national conference in the next few episodes. I'm Melissa Yeo, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning, all. Distinguished colleagues, Justice Vickery. I'll give you a salad this morning for breakfast. 2 large pieces of fruit, 1 small piece of fruit, and some gelatin sort of holding it all together. I'll call this innovation and opportunities, and the piece that holds it all together is the question about how can we improve, and to some degree, how can we react to the situations around us. The 2 large pieces of fruit are a $30 billion opportunity for cost savings in Australia and an opportunity to raise our professional performance in the engineering sector. And then finally, global trade and engineering services and what that means. As Justice Vickery mentioned, the Warren Centre is named for William Henry Warren, the first lecturer in engineering on the continent. So we stand on the shoulders of giants, but I cannot say that anything that I've done is as big as that Sydney Harbour Bridge. It's quite a piece of work. Bradfield was one of Warren's students, and the diagram that you see there is the 1912 layout of the City of Sydney rail system, and it's substantially the same today as what it was originally imagined. And of course, the Harbour Bridge there in 1930. The Warren Centre is a science, technology, innovation center at the University of Sydney. We're a think tank. What a think tank does is it gets inside the minds of those that listen to it, and it twists your mind and turns your mind in a different direction. I'll attempt to do that this morning. The Warren Centre is a place of collaboration between universities, especially the University of Sydney, government, and industry, and we have articles of incorporation that send me off on a mission to advance innovation and promote advanced engineering on the continent of Australia. So I'll do that this morning if I'm successful. There are 2 enduring themes at the Warren Centre among the people that have been there over the years. One is what I call the innovator entrepreneur. Men and women who have invented a new technology and built a company based on that technology. And the second major person that is there is the placemaker, the builder and the placemaker. And I'll be really turning my attention to those builders and placemakers. But over the years, over 33 years, the Warren Centre has sought to facilitate self-led industry reform and improvement. This is typical of the work that we do, a panel discussion about translating what's happening in innovation. So this was the beginning of this year. We had Dean Economou, a data technologist from Data 61, talking about transportation data. The third person on the panel there is Eduardo Nebo. Eduardo's Australian Centre for Field Robotics has autonomous cars. And Eduardo was talking about integrating new technology into transport systems to make driving safer and to prevent loss of human life. The fourth person on that panel is Dave Dave Rorsheim, the managing director of Uber ANZ. So in February, the topic of autonomous cars, the topic of driving apps was very new and fairly unknown in Australia, but by putting this on at the ASX in an evening, we were able to give the technical community an idea of what was coming in the following 12 months. Sometimes we do advice to industry. I'll talk today a little about work that we've done for the International Copper Association looking at demographic trends, transportation trends, and some very large capital projects up in Asia, and perhaps speak about that tomorrow a bit. The efforts that the Warren Center undertakes are frequently very long-term efforts, impacting the way that people think and the way that we approach our work as engineers and lawyers. You may be aware of some of the projects there in the past. There's an interesting little driverless car pod there that was imagined in 2000, well before we see these actually being deployed now in London and in Perth. 30 years of advocacy. Frequently, the effects of that advocacy is not felt for decades on, and that's some of the projects of my predecessors. Today, I'll talk about planning, engineering, and delivery, and a portfolio of projects that we have at the Warren Center. At the front end of this is an activity of urban reform and deciding what types of infrastructure, what might we need in our new cities. In the middle part, I'll speak about this as an opportunity for saving as much as $30 billion a year on infrastructure waste and what that waste means. And then finally, an element over here, professional performance, also known as PPIR, which is a standard of care for engineering. Internationally, we have case studies of projects that have blown out with enormous cost overruns, enormous difficulty of getting the asset up and running so that the quality was not realized. It's better sometimes to talk about these in foreign jurisdictions because there's no one in the room who worked on them. But the one on the top left here is the Berlin airport, which was 7 years late and $5 billion overblown. And I understood at the time that we put this photograph together that although you couldn't take off from that airport, you could pay 10 euros and take a bus tour around a dysfunctional airport, and that was their cash flow strain perhaps for the first year. And this airport in Madrid was a $1.5 billion asset that was actually shut down shortly after it was built and not used. This pattern is not unusual around the world, and there are multiple international examples of dysfunctional major infrastructure projects. In 2013, Infrastructure Australia commissioned a report, and the output of that report was that in the coming years, Australia would be spending up to $200 billion a year on infrastructure projects as a nation. And that's a mixture of private and public spending. But it's typical that a large fraction of that is waste. And waste doesn't mean sort of scrap steel left over at the end of the project. It means it's money that was spent that didn't deliver the objectives of the person who paid for the project. And so that $30 billion a year figure is cited there by Infrastructure Australia. It's a large chunk of GDP, and advanced nations are implementing procedures to improve their capability to deliver large infrastructure, and certainly Australia and the rest of the world needs large infrastructure in the coming years. So we've gone through a stack of papers and projects and academic papers on the subject and broken those down into root cause areas and made an invitation to industry and to the legal profession to join together to address and reform the way that we undertake major projects. The four categories are culture, process, technology, and governance. And just looking at some of the pieces inside those elements, learning from failure, how to incorporate innovation on a project and bring new technology in while at the same time mitigating the risk that an adverse effect may come, how we allocate risks among complex tiers of contractor, subcontractor, sub-subcontractor, and so that the risk is borne by the party who's most able to manage it. And in the governance segment there, independence and authority for decisions coming from someone who doesn't have perhaps a political motivation to promote the project, but is looking out for the interests of the payer. In 2015, 2016, we led a number of panel discussions in Sydney and had some participation from friends in Melbourne who came up. You can see the companies there that participated. At the present time, this is an ongoing, unaddressed problem in Australia. October 23rd, Grattan Institute issued a report titled Cost Overruns in the Transport Infrastructure. You can pull this up on your iPad when you get back to the office. They analyzed 836 projects. A few of these were real dogs that blew out by 5 times, especially a couple of road projects. But the conclusion there was that the Australian governments, state level and Commonwealth level, had spent $28 billion over 15 years, and there were some not so nice statements there about the political motivations of those promoting the projects. The report concludes that there's a stronger governance role needed for Infrastructure Australia to sort of pre-approve and vet the projects. It's probably something that is not unknown for those who've been in the space for some time. As you know, in December 2015, international agreement to address the climate was reached, and for those of us in the construction industry that are looking forward on the conveyor belt for some very large infrastructure projects that are coming, perhaps there's a new vocabulary that's not spoken very broadly in the construction arena, and I'll introduce you to a few words there. The COP21 Paris conference was the conference in December. Nations put forward their individual, nationally determined contributions, sort of voluntary contributions to reduce CO2 emissions. And in Australia and in other countries, there was a project called the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project to list out what those technologies would be. There were 3 scenarios considered for Australia: carbon capture and sequestration, which would require some new technology, and very large bolt-on CO2 extraction and sequestration technologies. Large capital projects would be required, and some additional technology. The second scenario was more renewable and storage, and that storage technology isn't around now. We had some discussions at the table yesterday about warranties for new technology, and the storage technologies that don't exist now. We can't magically make solar panels create electricity in the middle of the night, or wind farms create wind when the wind stops blowing, wind electricity. So there's major technologies that aren't on the table now, and those will require complex types of contracts to guarantee the storage in the future, if that's on the horizon. This third deep decarbonization pathway project scenario was nuclear power in Australia. And so the range of technologies that are required there, the size of the projects is very large. And these will be technically complex projects, perhaps with technology coming from offshore to Australia. So get them in your field of view for the future. There's a lot of work coming. On October 4th, the 55 countries, 55% of emissions trigger happened. And the 30-day process started that the Paris conference would become live. So today is November the 4th, is that right? So we're live today. Later in the week, there'll be a climate conference in Marrakesh with some more work happening in this space. Yesterday at 11 o'clock, Energy, the French owner of Hazelwood Power Plant in Victoria, announced they'd be shutting down the power plant, laying off 800 employees, 200 contractors, a large chunk of electricity that'll have to be replaced from somewhere. So we don't know what the cost of the decarbonization policy will be in the future. It will be in the tens of billions, perhaps in the order of magnitude of $100 billion of work, and the climate enthusiasts would say that we need to hit that mark by 2050. So there's a huge amount of work, a huge amount of money to be spent in a fairly short period of time, and that is all dependent on the political will of people to pay more for electricity. So this is a complex space. October 31st, the Australian newspaper critiqued one of the projects ongoing at the moment and said that there was a blowout of $5 billion on the Wheatstone LNG project, and said that this project casts Australia as the most expensive place in the world to do energy projects. That is not a good position to be in when we look at the amount of work that will be required in the coming time to address the needs that are committed to in the Paris conference. So the Warren Center has ongoing engagement in this area. On November 24th, we'll have a series of speakers on large projects from Europe. Andrew McNaughton built the High Speed 2 project, very high-speed trains between cities in the UK, and Hans-Peter Vetsch there built the longest tunnel that mankind has ever built, a 57-kilometer tunnel through the Swiss Alps. That panel will be in Sydney on November 24th. If you're interested to attend, just let me know at the break, and I'll give you some information about it. And we're looking for anchor partners to run a roundtable on IP30 and realization of this $30 billion opportunity. The second piece of fruit in the fruit salad this morning is a bit more lawyerly and a little less public policy. The Warren Center for some years has promoted an idea that is professional performance, innovation, and risk, also known as PPAR. We've shortened that just to professional performance, so it's nice, clean, and sweet. Engineers Australia has well-developed guidelines for engineering ethics, engineering competency. Ethics being the moral framework under which we do our work, no bribes, truthful engagement. Competency is a stage 1, stage 2 thing for engineers. You graduate from a university with an accredited degree, you are stage 1 competent. After the engineer has worked for 4 years, the engineer can apply with their record of experience and become stage 2 competent. And that is a gateway that is past looking at the experiences and intelligence that's been put onto the hard drive of the engineer. What hasn't been written down in the past is looking prospectively or retrospectively at how a project was performed and how the engineer performed her work on that project, whether that performance met the standard of care. And the Warren Center has worked with industry partners, Engineers Australia, Consult Australia, a number of companies, a number of people in this room actually, to identify those elements of management, innovation, risk, public expectation, competence, task management, stakeholder management, and contracting that would define good performance on a project going forward, and that is PPIR. A number of companies sat on panels for a number of years to hammer that out. In the end, it fits nicely on two sides of one piece of paper with some definitions, so it's actually fairly simple. The document proclaims in the preamble that it sets out to define the standard of care, and as the lawyers in the room know, that has a specific legal meaning. In English common law, there's a principle of Bollum that is not in the engineering and construction context, but in the medical context, and especially in a context of public policy around health in the UK and the NHS. The High Court clearly rejected that principle in Rogers and Whittaker in 1992. In 2001, there was a bit of an insurance crisis with the collapse of HIH, and engineers were finding it difficult to have insurance for some of the work that they did. So the Warren Center began this process. At the same time, there were reforms with Civil Liabilities Act that codified elements of Bollum into each state's law. And each state has a line that says something along these lines, that the professional acting will not incur liability and negligence if they acted in a manner that represented competent professional practice. And if that standard is widely accepted by peer professional opinion, then it provides a shield for the engineer against negligence. A couple of other cases there, but the intent of the engineers and the lawyers and those in the industry was to create that shield and to write it down on a piece of paper, make it simple, and then to use that as a defense against negligence. So in Queensland, that standard of care is written into the Queensland Code for Registered Professional Engineers. Queensland is the only state now with an engineering registration requirement. But PPIR is a bit written into the code there. You will know a couple of recent news incidents, and I'll use my vocabulary carefully to describe those. But the first incident that I'll describe is the Bankstown Lidcombe Hospital medical gases disaster that happened that we're aware of now. In one regard, PPIR is a defense against negligence. In another aspect of its personality, it's aspirational from the older engineers to teach the younger engineers how to do their job better and how to raise their performance. And if you have followed the event, the Department of Health has issued an interim report, and it cites this mistake that happened when oxygen piping and nitrous oxide piping were crossed in an operating theater, and 2 babies, one was suffered brain injuries and one died in the operating room in the hospital. The Australian standard requires that piping should have been tested by a designated person who was installing it, and that test should have been written on a piece of paper and witnessed from someone in the hospital. But for various reasons, when the baby needed oxygen and went into the crib, into the cot, the baby was delivered nitrous oxide by accident. And if an engineer and if an engineering company might have turned their mind towards those elements of managing the engineering task, of communicating clearly with stakeholders and engaging those stakeholders in the task, and considering very carefully what the statutory requirements of the public were, then perhaps problems like this might be avoided in the future. And so that's the aspirational element that I'm appealing to you today, to take this out to your engineering organizations and promote the idea that we can train engineers to better performance. You'll also know, or you also will have seen perhaps the Dreamworld incident that happened perhaps about a week ago. 4 deaths. In 1986, the ride was installed. There was no regulation on amusement parks in Australia. In 1988, there was an amusement park design and installation standard. And then in 2009, there's a maintenance and repair standard. So we don't know what happened, but perhaps there will be people looking at that incident saying, what could we have done better to protect safety of the public? So that's PPIR. We've got a website. We're doing some training with universities now and students. You can see the universities there. There'll be an update from Revision 2 to Revision 3. Brett Walker's an SC in Sydney. He's advised us to insert some softening words: realistic, appropriate, reasonable. An example there is the word realistic inserted in this line. We've asked Mr. Walker to give a briefing, and that's tentatively planned for November 30th in Sydney, and that'll be confirmed. If you're interested, we'd love to have you come and hear Mr. Walker's presentation on PPIR. The last little piece of fruit in the fruit salad this morning is looking at globalization, how it affects our work in Sydney or in Australia. You know that the Japan Economic Partnership Agreement was signed in the last couple of years, CAFTA and CHAFTA. There's a Trans-Pacific Partnership that's floating out there. Whether that gets liftoff or not is to be seen. But just looking at CHAFTA, there's an article in CHAFTA that says that China and Australia will accord services and service providers with no less favorable treatment than it accords any other party, any other non-party of the treaty. So you can raise your hand if you're a British, Irish, American engineer, Canadian engineer working in Australia. CHAFTA essentially puts Chinese engineers on that same footing. And I haven't looked at CAFTA or the Japan agreement, but I imagine that those are the same. That has an effect on engineering services. There is Article 8.15 seeks to create flat, parallel, professional accommodation, including engineering services. We're not into Chinese traditional medicine, but engineering services are definitely qualified there. Construction-related engineering services, and you can see the list there. I believe that this may be opening the door for certain states and certain governments to reconsider whether engineering registration is a requirement. If foreign engineers come to Australia and they sort of have a free pass to perform engineering, but an Australian engineering go to China, there's a barrier, an entry barrier that is a registration system in China. Perhaps some of the states are trying to make a clear professional guideline about what it means to be an engineer. And certainly the Victorian government has a stakeholder consultation paper out from last month. And concluding there, looking back at the salad that we had for breakfast, the $30 billion opportunity in infrastructure productivity savings, professional performance in the PPIR standard, and perhaps how our globalization is calling for some adjustments in our recognition of who is a professional engineer in Australia. But the theme of all of this is that as a body of professionals in engineering and construction, we can do better, and I appeal for your support to move forward with improving the outcome of all of our work. There's a session tomorrow. Be welcome to have you tomorrow. I'll talk about infrastructure imperialism and some thoughts about Australia's place in the Asia-Pacific region. I'm Ashley. I'm at the Warren Center. Please feel free to contact me during the break, and we'll have a chat. Thank you.